everyone. It is Monday, the 20th of March. It is my youngest daughter's second birthday, by the way, everybody. Happy second birthday, Emmy Kate. Our final installment in the Jensen family turns 2 today, and she's all the things terrible 2s have, but we love her anyways. So anyway, it's Monday, March 20th. If you're in central Indiana, the sun is shining and the temperatures are rising. If you're around the world, I hope it's a wonderful day wherever you are. And it's wonderful because you're with us. So thank you for joining us for another March version of Mental Health Monday. Kristen, I was just trying to throw as many M words in there as humanly possible to make that alliteration work. But we are so honored today to switch things up a little bit, bring on a new fresh face who has some trendy glasses, by the way, to talk about mental health in the sports arena, which I love, especially with March Madness. Honestly, as a lot of sports fans probably need some mental health this morning after Purdue's whatever that was on Friday. And then I sat up and watched IU last night, gave up with about 90 seconds to go. Couldn't quite pull it through there. So there might be a lot of mental health that's needed around sports here this morning. So I'm going to introduce my good friend, Kristen Boice, the owner of Pathways to Healing Counseling here in Noblesville, who has graciously for the past 3 years walked us through mental health sessions here on Mental Health Monday, and allow Kristen to introduce our guest speaker. So good morning, Kristen.
Good morning, Mayor Jensen. Yes, Mental Health Monday with March Madness.
Woo, man.
Woo, we are really hitting on all cylinders today. So that's exciting.
Good.
So I am so thrilled beyond to have my dear friend, Elizabeth White. She is a licensed mental health counselor, addictions counselor, school counselor. The credentials are endless. EMDR trained therapist, fellow EMDR trained therapist. She owns The Well. She is also the team clinician for the Indianapolis Colts. And she is a wealth of information, depth of knowledge, and here on a mission to make an impact in mental health in the sports arena. And she speaks and does consulting for many corporations on diversity and inclusion, among other things, including mental health strategies and wellness programs. So Elizabeth, welcome to Mental Health Monday.
Yay! Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be with you guys. Mayor Jensen, so nice to meet you. To meet you. And Kristen, you know I adore you.
Oh, I'm so thankful you're here to talk about sports and mental health. Before we get started, we start every session with deep breathing. So we do square breathing. So let's get started. We'll do 2 deep breaths. I recommend this anytime you're stressed during the day to reset the nervous system and calm and get more clarity in the moment. So feet on the floor, we'll do 2 breaths together, kind of get comfortable in your seat, or if you're standing, feel your feet on the floor. A big deep inhale through your nose, and we're going to inhale for 4, hold the breath for 4, and slowly exhale out your mouth for 8. So let's do it together. Big deep inhale and release. Let's do one more big deep inhale. Hold, and then slowly release like you're cooling soup. Just kind of resets the nervous system. And I recommend doing this every hour throughout your day. So when you're really feeling that heightened level of overwhelm and anxiety, you know what to do. It's cueing the brain. The brain goes, oh, I need to take those deep breaths to help myself recenter and calm down.
I love it. Before I'm going to let you, Kristen, kind of navigate this conversation with Elizabeth here, but a few ground rules before we get started. I want to, first of all, if you have any questions throughout the show here this morning, anyone listening, feel free to chime in on the chat, or if you just want to say hi. I want to give a shout out to 2 of my good people who are listening. One of our deputy mayors is actually at home recovering from a surgery for the next couple of weeks. She's watching. Then one of Noblesville's newest residents, Alexandro, I officiated his wedding. He is now a Noblesville resident who moved here from Brazil. So Alexandro, thanks for listening, buddy. I know the weather's getting better for you, getting much more like your hometown. I apologize for last weekend. It was really a blip on the radar. He moved here in December, got married 3 days later on a brisk 11-degree December day when it was 85 degrees back home in Brazil. So he is still here, and I'm really proud of him. Happy to have him here. So, and again, if you have any questions, feel free to chime in on the chat. But and if we don't have an answer for you live during the show, we'll get it for you later. But Kristen, I want to also thank the Indianapolis Colts. I know, Elizabeth, you work with them, but they have done a tremendous job with their kickoff kicking the stigma campaign. I've had a chance to meet Kaylin Ursay and all the work that they're doing. She invited me to join them on a mental health roundtable once. So kudos to them for really leaning in on this mission and empowering and employing people like you, Elizabeth, for taking this to the next level. So Kristen, I'll let you fire away, and I'll be here for comic relief throughout the conversation.
Yeah, feel free to chime in.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
so
we'll
much
see.
we can talk about. We have so little time. Feel free to put your questions in the comments for Elizabeth. I thought we'd jump in and just talk about kind of the state of the union with sports and mental health. What are you seeing not only with the Colts, but just in general with an emphasis in mental and emotional wellness?
You know, the thing that's been interesting for me is I started with the Colts. So this is going to be my 9th season coming up. So I started with them before having a clinician was a part of the CBA, which is the agreement that the players have about what types of services and what types of things are going to happen at the league level. So now it is a mandate. Starting, I think, 2020, that every team have a clinician. So the thing that I always love to share with folks regarding the Indianapolis Colts is that they were ahead of the pack, right? So they identified this need in their Colts community before it was mandated to be a requirement that I be in the building. So I love the fact that we are having the conversation about the pressure and the stress that can happen for a person who's a private person with a very public life. And I think one of the things that many of us can forget about is that the average professional athlete is entering at a time that none of us wanted the whole world to see everything that we were doing, right? So if you're 18, 19, 20, 22 years old, none of us really wanted the whole world to be able to know in a split second what was going on with us, shortcomings, failures, and maybe even successes, right? So that's one of the things that I love is that I think that the conversation has gotten really, really robust. It's crossing over into all different spectrums of sport. And I think it was just really time. It was probably past time.
What do you think is the biggest challenge when it comes to sports and mental health?
Probably one of the biggest challenges is time. The demands of the schedule for training and preparation are significant, right? And so then on top of that, you have still trying to maintain your own identity just as a human being, as a person. So if you are in season, let's say football, if you're in season, that is can be a very grueling work schedule. And you might still be a dad, right? Who has and a husband, or a son who has a mom who's in the hospital or whatever. So I think one of the biggest challenges is the time to figure out how to take care of your mental health, which is why I love the fact that you started with box breathing right there, right? Because I'm always trying to figure out what can I share that can be done in 1 minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes.
Could I jump in on that? Because I think somebody actually, Glenn just pointed out a good point. This conversation around that they are husbands and fathers or spouses, we talk about this a lot with the public safety programming that we have in the city of Noblesville. We have a mental health therapy dog. We actually have 2 of them now that work with our officers, even helping them process through the trauma that they saw throughout the day. Because I think we forget that our police officers, our athletes, our firefighters also are human beings. Our elected officials, for that matter, are human beings that go home and change diapers and kiss spouses and put kids to bed. So I think that is a huge point that we forget sometimes. We put these people on pedestals. They are real people. And so I was going to ask, as you said, what kind of tips do you give maybe athletes on the field, maybe in the middle of a game, trying to focus on their mental health and balancing all that out? I know you talked about square breathing, but could you and Kristen maybe share a few tips that you share to professional athletes?
Sure. So one of the partnerships that the NFL has is with Headspace. And so I encourage all of our guys to download Headspace. And we will definitely work on sleeping before the game, sleeping the night after the game. Many people think about the preparation for the game, but it's also life after the game, whether you're managing an injury or whether you're not happy with the outcome, right? So we'll encourage our guys to use the interventions that are on there. One of the other ones we do is the 2x4. So I talk to guys early in the season about things they can do in 2 minutes, 2 hours, 2 days, or 2 weeks. So we're always trying to have this conversation about making mental health hygienic. Doing something every single day for your mental health is just as important as brushing your teeth every single day. And we would never ever go outside without hopefully without brushing
My
without
kids
brushing our
probably would.
teeth, right? So we have to have this conversation about mental health being a part of that. For players, I stole this from another clinician. I wish I knew who it was. I don't remember right now, but I read this about flushing it. So I've used that with my players that if you've gone out and a play has not gone the way you wanted, then you got to flush it like the toilet. Like, we're not trying to examine it. We're not trying to figure out what's going on. We're like, okay, I'm done with that and on to the next thing. So that mindfulness piece about staying with the next play, staying present in the current play. And when that one's over, moving on to the next one is something that players will definitely talk about during a game.
How about shame in professional athletes and just athletes in general? Like, I messed up the game. I lost the winning point. I didn't get the touchdown, didn't make the pass, didn't whatever.
Yeah.
What are some of the advice you give on shame and working through that?
Yeah. The conversation that we have about that is just that we always win and lose as a team. Nothing is going to really come. I mean, we watch it and say it comes down to one play, but it really isn't one play. It's really this whole entire 40 minutes, 50 minutes, whatever game you're playing in, that determines whether or not there's a win or a loss. And so I think a lot of that is really just preparing players before the game that they only have the opportunity to make the best decision at the time. And whatever happens after that, we're just going to let it go. I don't really find that players get stuck there often because, again, you don't have time. If you think about a game on Sunday, we're going to come in and debrief on Monday. We're back at it by Wednesday for the next week. So one of the things that really is the most important is the ability to be resilient. And that's probably where I spend more of my conversation, which is in that ability to develop the skill to bounce back. Because of the fact that we don't really have enough time. If we stay lost in that bad play on Sunday, we're going to spend time that we need to be preparing for the next game, which is only 7 days away.
Talk to me about addictions with athletes. We see some of the big athletes at times, they have an alcohol problem, a drug addiction, gambling. Talk to me about what you see and how you help people work through that piece.
Fortunately, I haven't really had to do a lot of work in that vein. Just maybe it hasn't just been something that we've had to face significantly. I can say that the NFL does have a substance use and abuse disorder program that I think is helpful. And, now probably one of the major conversations is around ways to unwind because cannabis is making its rounds, in several of states about whether or not it is something that can be used to recreationally. But I'm trying to think if there's anything. I really haven't had to have a lot of experience with substance use and abuse for us, which is, fingers crossed, it's been great. I'm trying to think about other players and other things that I've seen. The only thing is just that the NFL does have a great program for that.
Could you talk a little bit about Kristen mentioned fame or shame.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about fame?
Yeah.
I'm just kind of sticking, I think there's a lot of people who glamorize the lifestyle of a NFL player or professional athlete. I imagine there's a lot of downsides with that as well. And what are you seeing, and how do you kind of approach the fame conversation with your clients?
Yeah. I think that, this the one thing I love about being in the Midwest. It's one of the things I like about Indiana. I think that we really do know how to stay pretty grounded around these parts, which has been fortunate for me. If we were in LA or Las Vegas, that might be a different conversation, just because life is very different in those parts of the country, or can be very different in those parts of the country. What I like to share about this is there is this probably big space between what people perceive this life to be and what it really is. Part of that is many people think that every single day is just this jetting around, having this personal driver and this housekeeper or whatever. But the truth is that we have very typical human beings who are working a very public job. We have conversations around how to manage finances, and some of those conversations are on how to say no and how to set healthy boundaries, right? Because people generally think that professional athletes are making a lot more money than they really are. You're going to have your huge contracts, your Tom Brady, your Aaron Rodgers, you're going to have those types of contracts. But the average player has a whole lot of people that are looking to take some money out of that check. And then there's always the cost of living, and many players are bi-coastal. They might be here during certain parts of the year and other places at the other times of the year. And so that can be expensive as well. As far as managing fame, I think it's just developing your identity, making sure that you know who you are as a person, what's important to you, and then also being able to say no when that's appropriate too. But I bring up again that, remember, now the average person that's entering this field is probably like 22 years old. So knowing who you are at 22 still comes with its own challenges. We all know the brain is still developing until 25. Right. So your ability to count up consequences and your ability to make make the what we might think is the best decision is still going to be hampered because your brain is not even there yet. So I'm always working on, hey, how do you get to be the man that you want to be on the field and off the field? But they're still in a very, very prime stage of development.
I think that's probably one of the things that shocked me the most this morning is thinking about that, I don't think we realize not only are they human beings, but they're coming into this at a very still emotionally maturing stage of life and trying to walk through that. That would be incredible. So Glenn had a question that was really great. What are the greatest mental blocks you find with your athletes?
Yeah, it's probably performance. Just, am I good enough? I think that's one of the things that people don't know is that every single week there really is a competition for your job. That's really the truth. You can be benched at any point. There's a reason why there's a depth chart, right? Like, we're predicting that this person is playing, is going to start this week, but there's a reason why the depth chart changes every week, because somebody might not be starting from week to week. So the pressure that can happen for a person who really is maybe on the bubble about whether or not they're going to be starting or whether or not they're going to be able to, how many reps they're going to have in a game can definitely be one of the mental challenges that a player might face. I just don't want think about that. Every single week you're trying to figure, are you going to be the mayor next week? Mayor Jensen.
Luckily, I do a 4-year cycle, not an every week cycle. So, compared to the weekly cycle, that 4 years looks pretty good.
Yeah. And so I'm not sure how other sports do it necessarily, because I don't have any clients now in the NBA. So I'm not exactly sure, but for football, it can definitely be that way. So there's a lot of pressure about, am I performing well? And am I going to keep my spot?
And that's what I was going to ask about fear and anxiety, fear of injury, fear of losing the job, fear of not getting to play, whatever the fear might be. How do you help them work through fear?
Well, we'll do guided meditations. We can do some EFT tapping, EMDR. Kristen referenced EMDR at the beginning of our conversation. Eye movement, desensitization, reprocessing is such a long phrase, but that may be something that might be appropriate. In my work, one of the greatest challenges has been returning from a significant injury. There can be a lot of anxiety about that, because if you think about it, if any of us have even gone through, let's say, a car wreck, you kind of replay it in your mind over and over and over. If you get to that intersection and you can kind of see how things happened. Well, when you get hurt on your field, that's the field you're playing on at least half the season. So the opportunity to keep replaying something negative happening in your head is definitely present. And that may be the time that I would slide into something a little more clinical and try to work through that. So I love guided visualizations, identifying the outcome that I want and leading a player through that, starting as early as like, okay, this is what it looks like when I get up in the morning of the game. And when I eat my breakfast, this is how I look and this is how I feel. And then I'm walking down to the bus and how do I feel then? So kind of walking through a guided meditation and identifying the spaces where anxiety shows up, and then deep breathing through it or talking through how to manage that stress at the time. And usually we have some pretty good results, but definitely managing, going back to the field after injuries, definitely one that can produce anxiety.
That makes a lot of sense. And the fear of getting re-injured.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
And that concern of what would happen if I get re-injured.
Yes.
And then Headspace is great for that too. The app we were talking about that has meditations, it has coping strategies. It's an app you can download and then use it at night or during the day or whenever you need it. Yes. So what are some of the other pieces in terms of a player getting stuck? Is it past trauma? How much of past trauma, maybe it could even look like some of their quote unquote failures in the past or things along those lines get replayed? How much of that do you have to work through with the players in order to clear the mindset to be able to play the game they want to play?
Yeah, that can definitely show up. One of the things I think people would probably be surprised to hear about is the role of relocation.
Mm.
Because you could play on, we've had what, 5 different quarterbacks, in our organization in the last 5 years. So there's a lot of relocation, a lot of moving around. And if a person has had a military family or, a family that had some more issues with poverty, where moving was a trauma for them, then to have this job now where you might be on 5 different teams in 5 years can definitely be something that can be a trouble spot. For as an example, if you have trouble connecting and the little kid on the inside of you that had to move around and wasn't accepted well, now has to move to this new team and you're trying to figure out how to fit into this new team again, you kind of go right back to, that 6-year-old, that 8-year-old, that 10-year-old who was trying to fit in. And so since team synergy is so important, that could be something that we may have to work through is how do you manage that trauma of having to relocate several times and then fit in now with the new team. That would definitely be something that we could look at.
One something I've thought about too, not only just the player relocating, but some of them have young families that you're picking up and moving. I think about I have 4 little kids and my actions in this job and down the road, and that weighs on my mind heavily throughout every single day of my life. I would imagine that would be a whole nother layer of anxiety into a player.
Yes, because you don't want to have to uproot your kids. And the other part about it is, do you want to live separately from them too, right? Because you do have like the opportunity for mid-season trades or all those kinds of things. And so it is a big decision when those kinds of transitions happen. And then let's be clear, it also affects the other staff too. So coaches also are moving around quite a bit, as well as other support staff people can do too. So that definitely could be one trauma that could affect a player.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask. I saw a good buddy of mine, Jamie Yost, asked a question about with athletes, youth is a factor. Do you see a difference between the younger and older athletes with what issues they have? That's a great question.
You know what I love about the older athletes? I just love the seasoning. Can I call it the seasoning?
Yeah.
It is the confidence. It is the ability to communicate that we're going to be okay. It is that I've lived through a lot of things. I've seen things. And so this is how we got through that. And this is how you can get through that. So I think, that's just something that comes with life experience. And I've seen it be very, very helpful for younger players to be able to be around the older players who just had the opportunity to see that bounce back. One of my favorite types of players to work with is one that wasn't a draft pick necessarily, because they know and have had to develop that resilience, right, to find their place on the team and to be a significant contributor. And I love being able to work with players who didn't have necessarily the ease of transitioning to this lifestyle and this career. So that's definitely one of the things. As far as younger players are concerned, I think the role of social media probably affects younger players a bit more because they've had the opportunity to have it be present probably from their mama's wombs now, to today. And that definitely can change things. So I encourage players many times to take it easy on social media, or to disconnect, or to choose maybe one platform versus 2 or 3 platforms that they like to peruse and frequent, just because it gets noisy. Last year, there were some major, I think that college athletes are seeing it now too, that people are really mean and hurtful and say things that are borderline criminal to people, about them being hurt, hurting their families because something hasn't gone well in the game, or because a play hasn't gone well in the game. So just tuning out some of that and quieting some of that noise, I think is one of the challenges that younger players can face, for sure.
One of the things I think is important too, and I know we have another question, is relationships, marriages, relationships, and how those are impacted by being a professional athlete or just an athlete in general.
Yeah.
What do you see in terms of people through that? Because I can imagine that's a big part of being a professional athlete.
It can definitely be challenging. I think we probably all have busy weeks when we're trying to figure out how to connect with our partners. Well, imagine if you are working 12-hour days and then gone on the weekend too. So that's definitely something that can face them. I think there are some things put in place for significant others of players to try to support them. And typically they have a really good close-knit group of that are that can support each other through that. But it definitely is a challenge. But I find that it is still very typical for what we would all face. It is, how do we speak to each other? It is, how do we identify each other's love languages? It is, in a busy week, in a week when you feel overwhelmed and it seems like there's not going to be time for anything, how do I prioritize you or communicate love and care and concern to you? It is, are we meeting each other's needs? And so many of the questions are the same. It's just going to be maybe for a different schedule, trying to figure out how to meet those needs.
So Glenn had another good question. Glenn, kudos to you. You're rocking these questions here. What do you find the difference mentally between players that become successful versus maybe those who fall a bit short?
Yeah, you know what? I think it's self-talk. I think those players who find a way to not take themselves too seriously, to move on quickly from a setback, to identify what needs to be in their routine and their schedule to help them reach their top performance. And probably also those who know how to reach out and ask for support. I think those are the ones that go further than the other ones, because we've seen it. I think we've all seen it probably in our own workplace, in our own friendship circle. It's not only about talent. It's never only about talent, right? So talent can only take you so far, but character is what really is probably going to help you to maintain the doors that talent can open for you. And a part of that is in how you speak to yourself. And you've got to have the conversation about your worth and your value not being determined by how well you perform on that field or on that court. It really is going to be about how you're showing up in the world. And that's why it matters who you are on and off the field.
That's so true.
So good. That was like the fastest half an hour of my life, Kristen.
I know. I was going to have a part two because I wanted to get to diversity and inclusion too. We didn't hear, so that'll be, maybe you have to come back, Elizabeth.
Yeah, maybe you could come back, Elizabeth, because that was wonderful. And I think this is a very appropriate conversation on a day that I think I read last night that the cast of Ted Lasso is going to be at the White House today with President Biden talking about mental health. Yes, it was just because I love that show, by the way. It's awesome. And it has very much to do with what we're talking about today with professional athletes and mental health. So they're at the White House today with the president talking about mental health. So this just all came together so beautifully. So Elizabeth, thank you so much. If it's okay, we may book you again maybe later this summer. We can continue this conversation. Thanks to the Colts and again for leaning in on this topic. It is so important. I learned a lot. I'm going to keep flushing it as I go through the day. So, Kristen, if there's anywhere people need to turn to right now, they're having some mental challenges, where do they go?
988. This is the new universal. It's 911 is what we do for emergencies. If you have a physical emergency, for a mental health emergency, it's 988. You can text, call anytime, 24/7. Someone is available to help you, to walk you through things. Please know you don't have to do this alone. You matter, you're important, you're loved, and you're worth it. So, Elizabeth, you are so amazing. Thank you for your heart and soul and your time. We are so grateful for you.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure, guys.
All right. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
And